Good evening, everybody. I'm excited to welcome you to our alumni panel event tonight, Technology, Media, and the November Election. The event tonight is being put on by the Tufts Entrepreneurial Network, or TEN, which is a part of the Tufts Entrepreneurship Center in partnership with the Office of Alumni Relations. Tufts Entrepreneurial Network, or TEN, is a group that serves as a resource for alumni in the tech and startup spaces, helps alumni looking to transition from the corporate world to the tech and startup spaces, and is a resource for the university and the TEC. First off, I'd like to say thank you to our extended TEN and TEC team, as well as our great panelists and moderator today. Tonight, we'll first hear a discussion amongst some wonderful alumni panelists, and then we'll have an open 20-minute period at the end to our session for Q&A. So you're all on Zoom. Feel free to submit your questions along the way using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we will do our best to get to all of them before we close out tonight. My name is Luke Frazier, and I'm an alum from the class of 2012. I'm a member of the TEN National Chapter, as well as the chair of the Boston Chapter that actually will be starting up in a few weeks, so more to come on that. I got involved with TEN because I'm amped up by the entrepreneurial problem-solving spirit at Tufts and amongst the alumni community. And I truly believe that the positive impact that we can have as a university and as an alumni network only increases when we connect and learn from each other. Tonight's panel, Media, Technology, and the November Election, will highlight the role that media and tech play in a campaign, in a cause, how it's playing a role in this election season, and what might be in store for the future. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Liz Landers, and our panelists. Liz?
Hey, Luke, thank you. I'm Liz Landers. I graduated from Tufts in 2013 with a poli-sci degree. And I went after school to go work at CNN, where I worked for about 5 years. I covered the 2016 campaign trail for CNN. I was embedded with Senator Bernie Sanders and then Governor and now Vice President Mike Pence. After the campaign, I worked for CNN at the White House and then also on Capitol Hill. I moved over to Vice about a year and a half ago, and I cover politics, all things politics, sometimes tech things, politics, and I've been doing a lot of reporting out on the campaign trail. It's crazy that we're 2 weeks from Election Day. I'm very excited about that. And I'm gonna introduce our panelists and have them say a few words about what they do, and then we'll jump right into the conversation. So we will start with Aalok Kanani, who is the Director of Digital Communications for Biden for President.
Hello, hi, great to be here tonight. Like Liz said, my name is Aalok Kanani. I am the Director of Digital Communications on the Biden campaign. Essentially means I run the campaign's digital content, digital events, and digital partnerships, which, as you can imagine, as COVID has taken hold, has been a large portion of what the campaign does, so stayed busy. Before that, I have been working on this campaign cycle since really the beginning. I joined Mayor Pete's campaign back before he launched as his digital director. So competed against VP Biden, so I have that perspective as well. I graduated Tufts in 2011 and moved to DC like a lot of Tufts folks do, and started working for the Obama administration. I had, interned, volunteered for his campaign when I was at Tufts. And I think, probably like a lot of folks who are within my age bracket, got really excited by him, moved to DC, worked for him for about 4.5 years, and then spent the next few years after that jumping around tech, the private sector, in the NGO world, until I got pulled back into politics to beat Donald Trump. Yes, 2 weeks, that's insane to me, but very much looking forward to that break.
Yeah, I know, I can't believe it's so soon. Thank you. Okay, next we have Bennett Hillenbrand.
Great, thanks, Liz. So first, thanks to the Tufts Entrepreneurial Network for putting this panel on. My name is Bennett Hillenbrand. I graduated from Tufts in 2008 with a degree in electrical engineering. Currently, I lead the data and tooling efforts for the Facebook Open Research and Transparency team, where I work on making private data available for public benefit and research purposes. And I work on the technologies and policies that are necessary to make that possible. Prior to Facebook, between 2012 and 2019, I was the director of analytics at a national voter file company called Catalyst. They work with campaigns, institutions, and causes to deliver predictive models that underpin much of the democratic micro-targeting you've heard so much about since 2012. Before that, I worked on embedded hardware systems in remote radar units, which is maybe less relevant to this panel, but if you want to talk about radar theory, drop me a line on LinkedIn, I guess. But that's it for me. Thanks, Liz.
Sure. Okay, next we have Carly Reilly.
Awesome. Thank you, Liz. Thank you all for being here, to the Entrepreneurial Society for putting this on. My name is Carly Reilly. I spent the last year and a half, 2 years working on Andrew Yang's presidential campaign. I joined his team in mid-2018 when we were a very scrappy team. So I sort of saw his journey over the year and a half where he really grew. Spent the last year as our finance director, so really focused on the fundraising side of things. I actually I worked at the Tufts call center throughout college, so I really honed my fundraising chops at Tufts. And then more recently joined Kairos HQ, which is sort of a holding company, venture capital fund that really builds businesses that are helping solve the problems and helping in housing affordability, healthcare, and future of work issues. So very much sort of staying in some of the talking points that Andrew focused on, but really doing it now from the private sector side.
Great, thank you, Carly. Okay, last but not least, we have Philipp Sipman.
Hi all, Philipp here, he, him. I was class of 04 at Tufts. I was an econ major and I'm a co-founder of Outfox AI. And at Tufts, I was super into politics, was gonna go to DC, do the whole Hill thing, then ended up going and dropping into marketing tech for a number of years. So I spent a good chunk of my career here in New York working. I was a product VP at a big advertising company called MediaMath. And then after 16, realized once Donald Trump won that politics is being dramatically transformed by tech and certainly by advertising and modern advertising. And we ended up starting a company to allow folks to be able to become really good at doing online ads and run a whole bunch of A/B tests, create great content, be able to measure it, be able to report on it, really understand what the heck is going on. So we've been at this for 3 years, and right now we have programs in the field touching about 7 million folks, doing voter registration, doing turnout, and it's a very exciting time. Thank you.
Great. Okay, well, I kind of want to just start with a broad general question for everybody, since we're now living in this moment, and I know it's affected everybody's lives in every way, where we're doing most of our work and most of our political and marketing and everything online. So I think I'd love to just hear from everyone just kind of how you see media, new media, technology, all interacting right now in the end of this crazy, crazy campaign cycle that we've been sort of living through. And I'll open it up to whoever wants to answer first. Okay, I'm gonna just pick on someone. Philipp, I see you. You're up here first.
All right, super. Well, I think this year is in some ways really different, right? Because you for the first time, you have this huge shift, right? From TV dominated thinking to actually this being digital. And I wanna kind of give Aalok and Carly actually some of the credit for this, right? Because you had Mayor Pete come from nowhere, right? You had Andrew come from nowhere and just be like, holy cow, we can raise millions of dollars. We can have a brand. We can be real. People we could win versus Joe Biden. Like, it's amazing. And I think it really shifted the thinking. I think it's still very interesting. If you look at politics, on the Republican side, like the Trump campaign is really like a standout on digital. And a lot of the other campaigns aren't, like even like things you like, in very competitive states. And on the Democratic side, I think a lot of the bigger campaigns actually are really good at digital, but a lot of the down ballot campaigns you're talking about, state reps, state senate, like congressional, like those types of races that are like so important to everybody else's lives, they still like ways behind.
Look, you work currently on a campaign. I'm curious how the Biden strategy had to shift when everything kind of hit in March.
Yeah, it was really interesting coming actually from a campaign, like Philip mentioned, that was so, I think, advanced in how it used digital and tech, to one that wasn't. And really, they brought me in to help shepherd that. I joined the campaign after the pandemic had hit, and by that time, it was July of this year, and so a lot of the processes had started to shift. But really, what it looked like was you're taking this candidate who isn't a digital native and forcing him to do every single engagement online. And quite honestly, it looks like a lot of Zoom calls. You're not making Joe Biden download TikTok and like live stream his day, right? He is doing a lot of Zoom calls. He's meeting with a lot of the same folks. I think the reality of what the campaign looks like to the public doesn't change. I think how it works internally does. I think if you look at how the campaign relies on getting its message out now, that shift, that new kind of digital first approach that Philip mentioned, that I think has just been tremendously accelerated by the particulars of this pandemic, but something that I definitely saw start to happen in the primary, but now the campaign has to completely shift where now, all our money does go to digital because it's the only option. And so that's by far been the biggest windfall. And I think it'll stick around. I think it's an accelerant rather than something just to correct for the pandemic. So it's definitely interesting.
Yeah. Carly, I know you worked for a candidate who was very digitally native, savvy. I mean, just Andrew Yang was great on social media, still is. He still connects with a lot of people that way. Sort of describe how that campaign harnessed new media and tech.
Yeah, well, I was laughing as Aalok was saying his piece, because we, by contrast, on Andrew's campaign very early on, especially, we're very much like, put this camera in your face, like talk to your cell phone, like this is what you are. And so we were, we didn't get on TikTok, but definitely Instagram Live. Like early on, we were very much trying to get our message out that way because we just knew we weren't going to be taken seriously, sort of in other forums. And so that was where we were going to have to play. The biggest takeaway that I really felt like I had in the media space was sort of how our media landscape is fragmenting, and the role podcasts played in our rise. I've been saying to people, I think legacy media really legitimizes you and podcasts popularize you. And I think where Andrew really struggled was with that legitimizing piece. And there's plenty of reasons for that. Some are our fault, some I would say weren't our fault. But podcasts were huge. And when we look at like outcomes, I mean, tracking from like a fundraising perspective, which is where my focus was for a lot of it, like Andrew could have gone and done CNN hits and MSNBC hits all day long, and we didn't see $1 come in because of any of that. And he goes on Joe Rogan and you have like $500,000 in 24 hours, right? So it was really telling where you're kind of building a movement, and it's not in a lot of the legacy media areas. You're really building it now through the digital media space and through podcasts. And that was just something that I think we'll see more of moving forward. I mean, you saw other candidates now going on Joe Rogan and going on podcasts and speaking to audiences that way, but I think that'll continue to be a trend.
Yeah, I find the Joe Rogan phenomena really interesting. And I know Bernie has gone on his program before. And yeah, he has a huge reach. It's smart. Bennett, you have a different perspective from being on Facebook's election team. Kind of talk about how you are approaching this election cycle now that we're so close.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we're on the open research and transparency team itself, we're partnering with 17 external academics and 13 universities to run a very large study of Facebook and Instagram's impact on the election itself. You know, I think we all came out of 2016 pretty unsatisfied about what we were able to know and learn about the impacts in that, you know, in that year. And I think that there's some real growth in trying to learn from that and look at the impacts in 2020 in a real legitimate and credible way. But I also want to speak about that legitimizing versus popularizing and some of the things that were just mentioned, because I think a lot of folks are correctly, because of their vantage point, talking about the impacts of new media and COVID on the presidential campaigns, because that's what we're all focused on. But in many ways, it's actually far more impactful on down ballot campaigns. And when you start talking about state legislative races, you know, that sort of level where you're looking at maybe 20,000 votes will be cast total. You know, what does that mean? Where most of those votes, the main strategy would be going and literally talking to all 20,000 of those people, because you can if you're that candidate. And now, what are the ethical implications of actually going and doing that type of very direct canvassing of literally your entire constituency? How do you approach that in COVID? And given that most of those campaigns don't have the kind of money that's necessary to put up a TV spot, and they aren't getting the kind of earned media, and let's be honest, like that's actually one of the biggest valuations for the presidential campaigns, is not how much money they spend on TV or how much money they spend on digital advertising or what have you. It's the earned media, that legitimizing piece that Carly spoke about. When you don't have any of that, what do you do, right? Like now what do you do? And you know, I think we're going to see a lot of these state legislative campaigns who had already started to turn to digital advertising, digital outreach in the past several cycles, doing even more of that now. And I think some of the postmortems on that are going to be truly fascinating. And Aalok brought up another interesting point, which is how much of this is here to stay, right? Like, what if what we're seeing is generalizable to 2022 to 2024? Are we going to, you know, overlearn from this and perhaps overcorrect with respect to how we actually do political strategy going forward? Will we right size it? I don't know. You know, I think that these are questions that campaign managers will be grappling with, given how unique the 2020 cycle is, but the ever-changing nature of technology. You know, what takeaways are there that translate into future cycles? That's what I'm thinking about.
Bennett, can you just, you know, my reporter hat comes on. Can you give more details about how much you see local races using Facebook as a platform, as opposed to some of the bigger national races, which are kind of more of the focus that we're talking about now? But I do think you make an excellent point that it's easier to sort of reach more people in these really small races.
Yeah, great question. Happy to speak to that. The Wesleyan Media Lab is doing great work around this. Erica Franklin Fowler's lab at Wesleyan. And they've published a number of papers actually in 2019 and 2020 about this exact topic. And folks who have a developer account at Facebook can actually go get access to the Ad Library API, which has detailed demographic and spending data for all political advertisers on Facebook, and you can actually just go look at this yourself. And places like Wesleyan and others, NYU comes to mind, and a few others have built you know, visualization dashboards on top of that API to basically look at exactly the kinds of questions you're asking.
Perfect. Okay, I'm gonna have to check that out. Thank you.
Yeah, and we have one if anybody's interested.
Oh, great. Philipp has one too. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you. I think in terms, and I think that Carly kind of hit on this and Aalok did some too, sort of talk about how campaigns or causes can leverage what tech and media you guys want to be using right now, because I do think there's something to be said about not everybody needs to run to a CNN or a 60 Minutes anymore, when you can do a podcast or speak directly on a live stream. So whoever kind of wants to take that question.
Well, I'm sure, Aalok, you probably have good thoughts on this, but one recent example that I thought was striking, and that I think speaks to like the rapid response nature of things as you focus more digital, because the news is coming so hot and fast, and on social media, it can be amplified so quickly. I think that changes the strategy. So I'm thinking about, I don't know if you all followed Senator Perdue, a senator from Georgia who's running right now, and had a moment where he was speaking to thousands of followers and very intentionally seemingly like mispronounced and sort of mocked Kamala Harris's name. And very quickly, his opponent running against him as the Democrat in Georgia was able to spin that into like a clip and get it out on social media and raise like $2 million off of that. And so being able to capitalize on those moments very quickly and get it amplified out across social media, again, put sort of on a fundraising hat, like that sort of rapid response piece is sort of a big part of the game now. I wasn't directly on the digital side. We had a great digital fundraising director who I was lucky to sort of have on board, but I would imagine, Aalok, you would have a lot of thoughts on that as well.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, fundamentally, right, the campaigns have realized, I think, that they can reach more people through these platforms than they can traditional media outlets. That is the bottom line. Now, it's not that black and white. Obviously, there's different audiences to be reached from a 60 Minutes interview, which is in the news today. Then there is an Instagram Live. And I think campaigns are savvy about that, but as they're forced, as they've realized the kind of, not just the scale of what you can achieve online, they've adapted to it pretty quickly, but also I think the specific opportunities, right? So if you look at few recent examples that our campaign has encountered, like the VP debate, for example, for better or worse, probably for worse for human society, a big takeaway from the debate was a fly on Mike Pence's head. But that thing also allowed our campaign to leverage this debate that was otherwise pretty boring into this massive fundraising moment, to sell merchandise, to genuinely get out communications that advanced our efforts. So I think what we're realizing is both, yes, the scale is tremendous and we have to capitalize on that, but also, to Carly's point, that rapid response stuff is I think shifting from, oh, this is fun and clever, to, oh, this is how you actually raise massive amounts of money, how you go viral, how you do the things that kind of fuel a virtual campaign.
Can you kind of explain why the Biden campaign recently is involved with Animal Crossing, the video game? Is that something that you help with? Because that is one of those digital, platforms that I don't play that game, so I don't know, but I keep seeing stuff like this where, Biden keeps popping up here and Trump is doing all these different creative things to reach voters.
I am responsible for that. I do not know how to play Animal Crossing. I've tried to download it on my phone. I've been told, though, we have yes, the campaign, for folks who didn't see this pop, did a partnership with Animal Crossing where you can go, I don't know if it's buy or just take Biden merch and have signs. And as of a few days ago, we have our own island and we have field offices, and it's pretty built out. And the thinking here was, this is a group of folks who probably aren't tuned into the election. And is there a way to get them tuned in even faster? We know that the people playing Animal Crossing are, if not our base, tend to be our supporters. They're progressive, they're young, they're disengaged, and why not? The other dynamic is, I think, in a normal campaign, something like this might have some risk. There might be some question of, will Joe Biden seem a little bit out of touch if he's walking around Animal Crossing as a very old senior politician? And I think that's probably true. It's a little cringy, right, to see Joe Biden on Animal Crossing. But just compared to our opponent, that risk is so small. I don't think anyone's saying, well, that Joe Biden was on Animal Crossing, I'm not going to vote for him, compared to what we're up against, that we're able to take more shots like that, where the reward can be tremendous. Tons of earned media. We have like 50,000 people visited this island in the last 3 days. Please don't quote me on that. But some tremendous amount, and with pretty small risk. So we see things like that as essential to our strategy, just because why not?
Yeah, and I think it also just speaks to reaching people where they are and wherever that may be.
Sure. Yeah.
Philip, earlier you kind of talked about how things changed after 2016. And I just want to get your thoughts on how media and tech has changed in the last 4 years, and specifically what you're doing now to basically react to that in this election cycle.
Yeah, it's such a good question because what came out of 16, I think, is sort of like the Cambrian period, right? It's sort of like you just had like this explosion, implosion, right? And all of a sudden, I think on both sides, you had just kind of a huge amount of investment into kind of like the next big thing, right? Like, what is it going to save us? And I think on the Democratic side, there's been just amazing success around a lot of the volunteer management. So like Mobilize America is just like this giant, right? That like the Biden campaign is running, like Yang campaign, everybody just kind of like put all their events online, and all of a sudden everybody could like have like an open table, right? To like sign up a volunteer. And I think that's been incredibly powerful. Certainly on, I can speak to ads. There's been just kind of like a variety of different efforts, like some of them like funded by big PACs, to do AI, around, like what is the kind of the right color combination? What is the right like copy, right? That goes into an advertisement, for example. Like, kind of taking advantage of kind of like, what Bennett mentioned kind of in terms of the library. Now you can actually like learn from yourselves. You can actually learn like, okay, like here's what Andrew Yang's campaign is doing. And like, it seems like where they're putting money, right? So like, okay, maybe I can go and like do that, right? So you have sort of like the learnings like across the ecosystem are happening really fast. And I think then, certainly in the progressive side of the world, like a lot of the volunteer management, texting, like kind of, grassroots fundraising, a lot of it has really come down to, I think a model where, again, like you were like in this TV world where you kind of went and, talked to some like super PACs and like some really rich donors. And like, that's how you ran campaigns like in DC. And it seemed like a lot of it has shifted online into something a lot more grassroots, something more, I wouldn't call it like necessarily like totally human authentic, right? Because it's viral, it's online, it's like, it's, created, but something that's a lot more broad-based.
Yeah. Bennett, sort of to the extent that you can, I'd be curious to know how you see Facebook playing into this election cycle as compared to 2016. I think we all learned a lot about how Facebook was used and leveraged in 2016. So what are some of the ways that you guys are working to protect this election cycle, and what are you doing, I guess, specifically yourself to that extent?
Sure. So the actual, I mean, the election protections that are going in place on the platform, quite frankly, you all know as good as I do, right? Like there's a lot of communications going on about this. And my team is in many ways, because our remit is about like independent, credible research being conducted by external third parties. Our focus is very much turned outward, and basically like, how do we get them the information that they need to understand what's happening on the platform? So the actual, I spend far less of my time with, for example, like the elections integrity team, and far more with some of these external academics, understanding what their needs are, and like what data they need, to bring the transparency that is, I think we all agree, necessary around, the impact Facebook and Instagram are actually having here. And so in that space, we're working with a lot of novel privacy preserving technologies to figure out how do you balance this right to individual privacy with the right to understand, and research what's happening within our society. And that's not really a solved question at all, right? Like that is sort of one of the questions of our time. Of this, certainly this decade, how do you balance those two competing priorities, where you have, for the first time, really, a lot of data collected in private entities that for hundreds of years was basically the purview of governments. We understand how to do work with the census, and we understand how to make that census data available in a responsible way, to not just do things like district apportionment, which is what it's for, but also, it's used in many commercial spaces. It's used in a lot of places. So now you have sort of the flip question. Rather than this civic data that's been collected and being repurposed, how do you take this commercial data that's been collected, and how do you find ethical second order uses of that data to really drive this societal understanding? And so, as I mentioned several minutes ago, we're conducting this extremely large study. Some of you, if you received a notification in your Facebook newsfeed or your Instagram home screen asking you to participate in the US 2020 election study, that was me. Sorry for bothering you. But yeah, some of the people watching this webinar may in fact be enrolled in that study right now, because it is fairly broad. And and I think focusing on how my focus is really on how do we collect that data to understand that impact, and then how do we make it available.
I see, Philip, I want to give you a chance to answer this, because I know you just chimed in and said that you think that data privacy is huge. How do you see this playing into elections in this country right now?
Well, I think it's about sort of having this political experience that's authentic and something people I actually tuned into and I think nobody has ever liked the TV, politicians kind of hobnobbing, raising big money in DC, right? Like that model wasn't fun, right? Now, all of a sudden, okay, now my data is everywhere and I don't know where it is. That doesn't feel comfortable, right? And all of a sudden you're stalking me and the moment I donate to, Tufts or, a campaign, I'm gonna get 30 messages. I know I'm gonna do that. That's gonna happen, right? And probably 2 years after that, and probably from a bunch of other organizations, right? So I think that is something that if you want to talk to kind of what Carly said, what Aalok said, hey, folks are trying to take risks, right? Online allows folks to be different, to be edgy, to do something different. At the same time, right? We have this very cynical moment, right? And that's a lot of the young people are kind of okay, cool. You're giving me this fun thing that I can do with you on, this island now, but where's that data going to, right? Who's holding it? Is it going to some corporation somewhere across the world, right? So it's sort of kind of a very interesting, weird moment, right? Where there is both more authenticity and also this kind of weird dark side that people are really hey, is this the new way? Does this feel good? is Silicon Valley the new model? And it's we'll see.
Yeah, and I think a lot of us learned a lot about that after 2016, sort of in particular. In the spirit of the entrepreneurship panel, I want to ask folks, and I want to start with you, Carly, because we were sort of talking about this before. How is running a campaign similar and not similar to starting a company, to working at a startup?
Yeah, so happy to speak about this from my perspective, with the caveat being that I do not think the Andrew Yang campaign was broadly representative necessarily of campaigns. I think depending, again, on sort of your legitimacy out the gate, you resemble more or less a startup. In our case, frankly, we were very startup-y, not only because we were this sort of scrappy campaign, but also our candidate came from the entrepreneurial world. So he knew the startup world better, frankly, than he did the political world. So for me, the first year, I basically was wearing a ton of different hats. I planned our first national tour and rallies. They were small, but rallies, town halls, sort of in late 2018. I then was involved in some of the early voter contacting infrastructure before we had a real field director come in. So that very entrepreneurial skill set of being able to just kind of plug and play where you need to and solve problems was very much what we needed on our campaign for the first, frankly, year or so. But it is this weird thing, because unlike a startup where you can really groom people, there is an expiration date here. So you're both standing up a startup and with the very being very aware that you're also about to break it down. And that definitely impacts the way you go about things as well. So again, Andrew Yang campaign, probably more entrepreneurial than many, though I think there's some truths that cut across a number of campaigns.
Yeah, and it was definitely a scrappy campaign, but I think that we have seen so much success from some of these scrappier operations. I think Bernie's operation in 2016, from what I observed, was very scrappy at the start, and they really built a grassroots movement that turned into a huge political machine that I think he still really has behind him. Look, I know Pete was able to kind of use the traditional media and also sort of more of this startup scrappiness. How do you see campaigns comparing to maybe working at a startup or working in the more private sector of things?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. I think there's actually a lot about campaigns that is similar to startups. I actually had the benefit of coming from startups right before I joined Pete's campaign. And to me, the biggest thing was, yes, like I think how campaigns think and the goals and kind of the timelines are incredibly different, right? You are kind of IPOing or going bankrupt at a certain date. There's just a very different structure. But I think what is so, I think, hard in campaigns, and I think something that especially folks who build campaigns spend a lot of their time on, is just how do you build an organization quickly? How do you build an organization where, like Carly said, folks are wearing different hats, where folks are iterating on stuff constantly, where perfect can never be the enemy of what just works, where you're bootstrapping everything, and where you're hiring quickly, and where one bad hire can really disrupt the entire operation, as you're seeing with our opponent, who's like going through campaign managers. So I think in a lot of those ways, campaigns are incredibly similar, but with the one big caveat of, we have 2 weeks to IPO, and so, and this could be a whole panel, but like, a lot of the times when we choose to build something or invest in something or take on a new tech product, we have a very different approach to it than a startup would because of that timeline. But yeah, very similar in lots of ways.
Yeah, I don't think any, no startup launches and says, in 14 months, we're going to be bankrupt and we're all going to be out of a job, right? Like that's not, you wouldn't go work at that startup. And so I think it's often worth thinking about, especially when you were in a role like I was in at Catalyst, where you're interfacing with these campaigns, right? And like you're thinking about, enduring data products to support Democrats in perpetuity, and then there's these campaigns that have just a very clear and different incentive structure, which is to get to 50% +1 on election day. And then just vanish into the ether, right? And like those competing incentive structures are like they are omnipresent when you work in this space. If you work on the campaign side versus more on the institution building side, and I don't think I don't think anybody has cracked that nut yet on exactly how to make those relationships work perfectly. And maybe it's okay. Maybe that's okay. Because campaigns are designed to do what they're designed to do. They're designed to win elections. And I think in many ways, everything that was just mentioned is spot on with that one really, really important distinction of like, what does it mean in terms of how you interact with staff, how you treat your staff, how you prioritize what you spend money on, right? Like when you're talking about something that is designed to just shut down on November 4th.
And the joke, what I'd add there or like emphasize there is that like you've actually done something wrong if you're not bankrupt. Like your donors are not going to be happy if you haven't spent their money to try and win. So that's like a tight dance. It's like not just like, oh, you're going to be bankrupt. It's like, how are you going to get bankrupt? Because if you're not, you've done something wrong, which is definitely a different mindset than as a startup.
That's so true. And I know the Biden people are burning through money right now. They're getting to zero with their money at this point.
A lot of money in, a lot of money out. It's a good call.
I want to move to questions from our viewers. So Brian has a question. He says, if Biden wins, do you think that the news cycle, particularly online, will slow down somewhat from the incredibly fast pace it has been during Trump's presidency? Interesting. I have some thoughts about this, but I want to hear from you guys first. If anybody has any thoughts on this.
I have a very biased answer, but I will say I hope so. I mean, I think this is going to sound like campaign messaging, but I think just the very nature of who Joe Biden is will mean, yes, it will slow down. I think people are excited to be bored by politics again and not obsess over it. So I hope so. I would love to hear, you know, kind of Bennett's take on this as someone who is working for one of those very large media platforms.
Yeah, I mean, I think my answer is pretty similar. I, you know, as somebody who thinks about prioritization on a day-to-day basis, like in the product space, I often think about that question in the media space right now, which is, given how much is happening in politics, like what are we not spending our precious reporting resources on? Because we all know the drawdown that's happened in newsrooms over the last, whatever, 15 years. And how much air is being sucked out of the room by the current state of politics in the United States, not just in American newsrooms, but international newsrooms. And there's this de facto choice to cover whatever recent dust up is happening in the Trump administration that is taking away from other legitimate good journalism that could be happening. And I wonder what sort of the unknown cost of that has been.
Yeah, I'm going to weigh in as a journalist and say that I do think there's been great reporting that's been happening in the last 4 years. I think that the public has learned a lot from a lot of excellent reporting. I think immediately of the New York Times tax return story that just broke. I know that hasn't broken through to many voters that I speak with, but it is a huge monumental piece of reporting. I have a slightly different opinion that I think that we're going to see if President Trump does not win re-election. I do not think that he's going to go quietly. And I personally believe that there is going to be a lot of investigating that happens into the Trump administration for a long time to come, which I think will continue to fuel the news cycle. And I think that if the president has a Twitter handle still, which I wonder if Twitter will someday suspend him for his tweets, but I think that he will not go quietly and that he will continue to generate news even if he loses. That's my thought, Brian. Okay, we have another question from someone else that says, what about reaching seniors with tech? Philip, do you want to answer that?
So the funny thing about these modern platforms is that they're kind of age agnostic, right? Like 55 plus is actually the most engaged demographic on Facebook, right? Like and it's true for both, like, you know, showing people videos and GIFs and for asking for donations. And it is true for getting somebody to volunteer online. You know, white women over 55 is like the lifeblood of a lot of like political movements, and they are very active and very vocal online in a way that they might not be, you know, on like CNN on Vice, right? But it's absolutely there. And, you know, while the tools don't feel like they're kind of talking about it or like it's not like in the news, under the hood, that's actually kind of, that's what's going on. And that is what's behind a lot of this, right? In a quiet way.
Yeah, I'm curious, Bennett, if you can sort of weigh in on this about reaching seniors through Facebook, because as Philip just said, so many older Americans use the platform.
Yeah, I mean, kind of again outside my area of expertise. I think that like it's, you know, I think about it from the perspective of does Facebook constitute a population sample of the United States when you're talking about like impact that that Facebook is having? And Philipp is laughing because he's probably familiar with that problem. But yeah, the level of engagement of seniors online is actually like very high. I think like you're sort of alluding to this question of maybe the silent generation being less comfortable with smartphones, for example, or something along those lines is sort of the implied question there. And what do you do about that group of folks in this obviously very, the answer in 2016 would have been you go to where they live and you knock on their door and you talk to them. For a lot of reasons, that's probably a very bad idea this election cycle. And I think that there's probably a lot of reliance on traditional media. I think that it would be interesting if the Democratic primary had still had 6 viable candidates in it in June. I think there would have been a lot of really interesting natural experiments that would have happened around that age demographic group because of the full pivot to digital and what that would mean for that more traditional media reliance. This is a little bit of generalizing, but that more traditional media reliance by that older demographic compared to perhaps more tech savvy demographics, and whether or not you'd see more stability or less stability in terms of age cohort support as a function of that.
We have another question here about, do you see tech and media usage vary by political party? Look, do you at the Biden campaign, use specific social media platforms and new media platforms because you know that Democratic voters are on those platforms?
So it's interesting. I think if you think of the major platforms, especially where money is put, which tends to be Facebook and Google, we don't. If obviously, the smaller the platform, the more likelihood of that is. So, I mean, we know that Instagram skews younger, which tends to be more progressive. So yes, generally we're like more progressive stuff is okay on Instagram. I don't think that, I think there are assumptions about how platforms skew, but I also think how they operate in practice can be very different. For example, TikTok is obviously an incredibly young, progressive platform if you look at who's on there. But if you look at what kind of political content really takes off and does well, it's right-wing content. And it's from young people as well. And that has a lot to do with just the fact that the right wing is putting out a lot more outrage content, which does well on social media generally, but especially on TikTok, and we're not. I think we don't put too much thought into that, just because that doesn't really dictate the kind of who's listening and who's speaking on that platform, and that part's harder to tell.
Okay, this is a good general question that I want everybody to chime in on. We'll start with Carly. If you're an alum that wants to move to work in political technology, where is there an opportunity? Basically, what's some advice for people who might want to get into this field?
Again, I'm like probably a weird bit of an outlier here, but I will say this, which you may or may not find helpful, and asker of question. I think it's really interesting. My journey, I did not expect to get into politics directly or campaigns directly. I was a political science major at Tufts, but I saw myself being more tangential to it in media and other ways. But for me, I was sort of actually working on a show called Once Upon a Political Time. I was looking at the history of different political issues to contextualize them today. And I think I was doing a lot of research for that. And I started to sort of observe trends that I found very worrying, that I wouldn't have picked up on in the same way just reading headlines. It was like reading full books and like doing real research that sort of brought me to those. And that's actually drove me to UVI. And it was really just sort of curiosity that I had that allowed me to, when I heard Andrew Yang on a podcast in 2018 say, oh my gosh, I really think there's something here, long before anybody else or most other people sort of thought there was something there. So for me, my path to it was very much about staying open and sort of just staying curious about the world and sort of finding this amazing opportunity because of that. That's different than if you know you want to be in political tech, in which case I would say it's a lot of the standard routes. Like there's a lot of, there's a lot coming out of this world. So finding companies you're interested in, finding people on LinkedIn. I'm sure any number of us are connected to a lot of political tech things. I can say personally, I'm happy to have you reach out and connect you to folks. If you know you want to be in the political tech space, it's just, it's sort of the traditional means, and there's definitely spaces for people. But I came at it from a much more just kind of being interested and curious in things, and it led me to somewhere amazing. So I would say stay open-minded too.
That's
also,
of you to offer. Yeah, Bennett, what do you think?
I was just gonna say, I have one, I have sort of maybe something that's a bit unfortunate, which is the best time to get into political tech was 4 months ago, which is to say that the campaigns are huge, huge draws. And like these, as we sort of talked about, they build these massive staffs and then they vanish into the ether. Well, all of those folks who are coming off the campaign are looking for jobs in politics for the most part. Whereas a lot of the institutions in the DC area, New York and Chicago, things like the Center for Tech and Civic Life, which just got this massive grant to work on election security and protection across the entire country, as well as, the Catalysts of the world where I used to work, or, a union, or Planned Parenthood for America, or any of these institutions. They tend to lose staff to the campaigns, which means they're always trying to backfill between about March and July of an election year. And so unfortunately, as I said, the answer to your question, the best time to get in was about 4 months ago. But just something to keep in mind, for future election cycles, if for people who are maybe watching who are still students or what have you, that time period in even years where campaigns are drawing talent means that there's a lot of open jobs in sort of the political tech institutions.
Yeah, it's so true. It's very seasonal, the political world. Philipp, what would your advice be?
So I was going to suggest a couple things. One is that if you're on the progressive side of politics, right, there's a fantastic new resource. It's www.all-hands.us. I'll share the link. It was put on by Higher Ground Labs, which is one of our investors, and sort of has seeded a lot of the progressive tech ecosystem over the last few years, and some other wonderful organizations. So it's kind of a common jobs board for people who are actually interested in entrepreneurship and tech, have those backgrounds. So it just launched a few months ago, and it's a great resource. And then in terms of what Bennett just said and what Carly said, right, like some of this is serendipity. Some of this is actually finding the candidate that you really believe in and kind of like following them, right? Like next year is the New York City like elections. So anybody who's in New York, like this is the time to get involved. And, we talked about down ballot a little bit before, right? But like Virginia elections are next year, like there's elections in literally every part of the country, but they are kind of like not the big news making ones, right? So the tech doesn't die off. It just continues. It becomes a little bit like quieter, a little bit more institutional, like kind of organizations like Catalyst and some more traditional things. But it's very much out there. So please definitely reach out to. I think the network, the Tufts network, and this group is probably a great place to start.
That's great. Aalok, do you want to take this? And also, when you're done, I have a follow-up from you from another questioner.
Great. I'll keep my answer short. I think it's fundamentally go work on a campaign, right? I think I'll speak just for the progressive side that campaigns are still where I don't think we are always the most cutting edge, and we're probably not the most tech savvy, but it's where you can learn the most. We have massive budgets and tons of opportunity, and you learn fast. I think that advice is better for young folks trying to get involved. I think it's still this mentality of like, oh shucks, I'm in my 40s. I don't know how to do online fundraising. Let's let the 22-year-old do it, which is bad, but it's true. So take advantage of it. The stuff's easier to learn than it should be because it's still a little primitive, but like any smart Tufts student can jump in and tackle that.
I want to ask you real fast to follow up, and then we'll sort of wrap up the panel in a moment. Can you explain to us the power of Act Blue and how that has helped your campaign and so many of these campaigns in this election cycle? I mean, the amount of money is staggering. We all saw how much money was raised after RBG. And part of this question too is this kind of a game changer?
So, and I want Carly to weigh in as well, since she was closer to the fundraising stuff, but I think it is, the power of Act Blue can't be overstated right now in this moment where the Democrats have this. So again, for folks who don't know, Act Blue is our fundraising tool. Every Democratic campaign and cause fundraises through this portal, which makes our lives so much easier. So everything from online fundraising to rather our email fundraising to ads. It is a huge advantage now because of its ability to optimize and make things easy and make the experience easy for our donors and capture that grassroots energy. But I think it's something that's more of a brief advantage than a long-term one, because the Republicans are actively copying it and are just a few years behind. So I think kind of online fundraising tech will continue to improve and iterate because it's so lucrative. And I think campaigns are realizing that is the future of fundraising. But right now the advantage is incredible just because we have a tool that we started on before they did. Carly, I would love to hear what you think.
Yeah, I mean, and I have to say, I had somebody asking me a couple of questions. I'm in an office right now, so I missed parts of this. But if we're talking about Act Blue and its importance, I mean, everything that was just said is right. It cannot be overstated. It was such a fantastic tool to have, and something I'm sure you dug into more even than I got a chance to. But you know, if I could run it back, is playing around even more with the kind of functionality on Act Blue of like how to convert. Like, where do you start to lose people in the donating process? You know, how can you kind of change the look, the feel, the messaging, et cetera, to make sure you convert more people? I mean, these were questions we asked and played around with on the campaign, but I think that'll be just something that we continue to get granular with, and that the tool more or less allows you to do. And it was sort of an interesting place to A/B test different sort of like messaging, and it's just a tremendously important platform. It's where all of the money comes in, essentially. Certainly for us, is that like digitally being such a digital focus. I mean, it was all of it.
Yeah. I want to give Bennett a quick chance to add something about a Tufts connection for Act Blue.
Yeah, so one of the things that Act Blue does that I think is great is that you don't have to pick just one one campaign that you support. It allows PACs, like one run by a Tufts alum called Where It Matters. Where It's Needed. Sorry, Where It's Needed PAC, the WIN PAC. And it's run by another 08 alum, not me. But he takes full advantage of that because he's been meeting with a lot of legislators, state legislative campaigns, and then he finds state legislative races in districts that are likely to flip, in chambers that are likely to flip, and he lets you basically donate to his PAC, which will then distribute to 10 or 20 of those campaigns in various forms that you specify, or just as will be automated by the platform. But yeah, that ability of Act Blue to basically like be that centralizing force to bring in these needed financial resources and then distribute them cannot be overstated how important that's been.
I'm also pretty sure Act Blue they're based out of Somerville or Medford.
They are.
So that's the other Tufts connection. Yeah.
We love that.
617, baby. To call Act Blue support.
Well, we're going to wrap up here. I think, Carly, you have kind of a really smart point, something that I think a lot about as a member of the media. And just sort of as a wrap-up point here, how the media has really become politicized in this campaign cycle, and how you sort of see President weighing in on that.
Yeah, well, it was a point that I wanted to make because I think as you talk about like media and politics, it's interesting to see how media itself has become a political issue. I think that's something.
Tech. President Trump, big tech all the time.
Absolutely. And so Trump definitely used this to an advantage, but I actually think you see it in bipartisan ways. I can say that on our campaign, and Liz, you mentioned earlier, like Bernie Sanders and his scrappiness and Andrew and our scrappiness, that is sort of not our scrappiness is not incidental to our success, right? Part of it is that you create that community by saying, hey, we're really scrappy. And part of that scrappiness is, hey, we don't have the institutional support. We don't have sort of the legacy media behind us. And it's sort of that, and Trump, Bernie, and Andrew, I would say, are the three candidates that act a lot like that, sort of have this the most, where they sort of have a supporter base that is like, we've been red pilled. And I loved Andrew. I thought we did it in a way that I appreciated. I think Trump did it in a way that I would say I don't appreciate. But there is that kind of that sense that the media itself, and especially the way it's fragmented, has become a way to galvanize people. And again, speaking as like from a fundraising perspective, Andrew didn't always get, in fact, in every case, he got the least amount of speaking time on the debate stages. And in some cases, it felt really egregious. And we absolutely used that as a way to fundraise. And it became, I think it becomes a way to sort of galvanize your base. And that's just a dynamic that's really interesting. Bernie absolutely played into it as well, both in 2016 and this cycle, maybe even more so in 2016. But I just think it's a really thing to track and sort of see, and Trump especially obviously has created this very us versus them narrative when it comes to like fake news, and it's part of what he uses to galvanize his base. And you're right, tech absolutely being a part of it, big tech and sort of a lot of these institutions, and how we can make the institutions sort of the enemy, because politics is a lot about messaging who's the enemy and who you need to be scapegoating. So that was just something I thought would kind of relate to this conversation as well.
No, I think it's an excellent point. I have a lot of thoughts about that. We can have a whole nother panel discussing that another time. I see Luke has popped back up, so I think that's our cue that we are going to be finished. This was such a great conversation. I wish it could go longer. We got to almost all the questions, so I hope that the folks watching at home learned something.
Awesome. We did, I assure you that. Yeah, on behalf of all the attendees and 10 panelists, Liz, thank you so much for your time. This was wonderful. Liz, thanks for taking the lead on the discussion. And I said this before, but it's been a pleasure getting to know all of you and just being reminded of the wonderful folks in the Tufts alumni network and community. Always invigorates me. To the attendees, thank you so much for taking time out of your Tuesday evening for hopping on. I hope you found this interesting. I'm sure you did. You'll get a follow-up email when the recording of this event is prepared. So keep an eye out from that. I believe will come from Amy McDonald in the Tufts alumni office. You can also go to the Tufts alum YouTube channel and see eventually the recording of this, but also the recording of many other events that have happened as well on a variety of topics. And then if I also may plug the emerging Boston chapter of the Tufts Entrepreneurial Network, please, Amy's gonna put a registration form in the chat next Thursday evening at 6:30. If you're in the New England area, would love to have you join. It's a general interest meeting to talk about what people might find useful in a Boston chapter in these times. With that, I want to thank everyone again. This was incredibly fantastic. And I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their evening.
Go vote.
Go vote.
Go vote.
Bye. Thank you, Luke. Thank you,
Bye,
guys.
everyone.
Thanks, Liz.